folks, is what the Looney Tunes have been through since Space Jam, and I can happily say that we end this marathon on a very great note. At least before Space Jam 2, Space Jam 2, Space Jam 2. Hiya Toonheads, DBK here, and welcome finally to another Toonland Inquirer. Today we're going to talk about how the hell Warner Brothers went from demanding Space Jam 2 to cancelling it to demanding it again. And of course the review of Space Jam 2 itself. If you just want to skip to the review portion of this video, click this time below. Otherwise, well, just listen on. So, this was a long time coming, and I'm not just referring to the hiatus I took, but the fact that Space Jam 2, from concept to execution, took 2.5 decades to get to this point. So as you all know, there was a deal struck with Nike in the 90s that put the Looney Tunes, primarily Bugs, into various commercials with Michael Jordan, which culminated into Space Jam in 1996. A movie where Michael Jordan is summoned by the Looney Tunes to help them defeat the Monstars in a basketball match, who themselves managed to transform into huge BC basketball pros after sucking the talent from various NBA players, to prevent the latter's homeworld from using the former as slaves. And it sucked! The live-action bits were so boring and slow-moving. What happened in the real world after the Monstars sucked the talent out of the NBA players was pretty inconsequential. All the action, stakes, and everything we should be caring about was happening in Toon World, which brings me to the portrayal of the Looney Tunes themselves. They were more obnoxious than usual, and kind of jerky to an extent. In fact, in my very first Toonland Inquirer video I uploaded, or Whimsical Crank at the time, I even described the Looney Tunes in this movie as more like loony jerks, am I right? Between the unnecessarily grotesque close-ups, the gags, and of course the fact that this movie's primary purpose was to sell merchandise, it's no wonder Chuck Jones hated this movie. Now, feeding off the aspect of the merchandising, between the Looney Tunes and NBA's presence in this movie, combined with the use of Joe Pytka's direction, known for producing thousands of commercials in his lifetime, Space Jam was an executive's wet dream, and financially it did pay off. It was a massive success for Warner Brothers and arguably was responsible for keeping the Looney Tunes in the spotlight for a few more years at least. After all, it was after this movie when Warner Brothers decided to put the Looney Tunes into full-length movies that aren't just compilation films like in the 80s, but I've already covered that in other videos. And with Space Jam's natural success came the idea of a sequel, originally with the same director Joe Pytka and star Michael Jordan, but the latter didn't want to be a part of this movie, so this take was scrapped.
Can I go home now?
And then, of course, the sequel idea redeveloped into various different jams and stars, including Spy Jam with Jackie Chan, Race Jam with Jeff Gordon, Skate Jam with Tony Hawk, a golf-centric movie with Tiger Woods, which presumably would have been called Golf Jam. Yeah, I know I'm pulling lines from my other video at this point, so I may as well call out the fact again that Golf Jam was technically made as a Robot Chicken segment, which I didn't even know about until after I recorded my lines.
Jordan did Space Jam. I want my Space Jam.
While studios aren't lining up to lend their characters to a Tiger Woods movie, everyone aggressively passed except Deke, but I could not recommend it.
Welcome to the Golf Jam!
Time for a day of playing golf and being faithful to my girlfriend. What?
Welcome to Declan, Tiger.
Why, hi, Garfield.
I'm Heathcliff.
And of course, all of those ideas would get tossed, but with Warner Brothers still wanting to fill in the void for another Looney Tunes feature, they got Joe Dante on board. Only problem was, he actually wanted to direct a legitimate movie with the Looney Tunes characters, under Looney Tunes Back in Action. A movie that, although was much more faithful to the looniness of the franchise and characters, even if not perfect, was a box office failure that was bad enough to not only indefinitely at the time shelve plans for another Space Jam, but shut down Warner Brothers feature animation entirely. And with that, this corresponded with, and perhaps contributed to, a mini dark age that the Looney Tunes were heading into in the mid to late 2000s, with the shorts being pulled from American airwaves altogether, to Warner Brothers having no idea what to do with the franchise in general at the time. But then in 2011 we got the Looney Tunes show, which although has gotten mixed reception at its release, proved successful enough in ratings to put the Looney Tunes in front of public eye again to an extent, which would get even better as the years since progressed, but again, I've already rambled on for quite a bit on that. The mini resurgence in popularity of the Looney Tunes franchise at the time was quite a coincidence because in 2014, Warner Brothers officially announced a LeBron James-led Space Jam sequel. Yeah, 2014, 7 years ago. In the short term, this led to a few promotional spots, including Bugs Bunny being interviewed by Ahmed Rashad, Bugs and Blake Griffin taking on Marvin the Martian in the basketball tournament, and a Foot Locker commercial. As for the actual movie itself, development was quite convoluted as the next 5 years after the initial re-announcement were spent getting someone to stay as director. We went from Justin Lin to Terrence Nance to ultimately Malcolm D. Lee, who yes is related to Spike Lee as a cousin, and is apparently known for having a whiplashing quality among its movies. Hey, Sony went from Emoji Movie to Spider-Verse within 17 months. Anything's possible. But yes, Malcolm D. Lee is now director of Space Jam: A New Legacy, as the title reveal would show in May 2020. And then since this past April, we've been getting more trailers for the new movie, and my initial impressions on Space Jam: A New Legacy is that it's definitely gonna be a cash-in on various levels of nostalgia, sports-related products, and of course NBA fan service. But since this movie's released on HBO Max and in theaters on July 16, and having watched the movie myself at this very point, the time has now come to ask, were my initial impressions correct? Okay, that was a very stupid question, I know. So let's back up and really ask, does this movie at least do a better job keeping my attention than the already commercially dulled Space Jam? Well, let's just jump into it. First, let's recap the story of Space Jam: A New Legacy. It's about a stick-in-the-mud parent, LeBron in this case, who wants his kid Dom to be one thing, in this case a basketball player, despite the kid having passion in game building. Algorithm, that's his name, the villain residing in the Warner Brothers serververse, takes advantage of this upon LeBron projecting his idea that he generated for Warner Brothers, sucks both of them into the VR world, and kidnaps Dom to help build his basketball team based on the game Dom built, forcing LeBron to play against his team to get his son back or be stuck in the serververse forever. He's then sucked into Toon World where he meets Bugs, who had his own vendetta against Algie as well for luring the other Looney Tunes characters away, putting them into one of those road trip gather everyone type of plots. Highly unprepared, with Lola being the only one who couldn't actually play and LeBron getting frustrated with everyone. They transfer him onto the CG court to begin the game. Everyone turning onto the live stream is then sucked into the serververse, who turn out to be part of the bid too, as all of them inside will be stuck forever if the Toon Squad lost. If you remember the structure of the basketball match of Space Jam 1, besides the game being more based on what Dom created and a few other tweaks, this part largely follows a similar pattern to its predecessor, with of course the same outcome. So yeah, the story follows a lot of similar patterns, and to a fault too. I mean, the father-son conflict, with an argument being the last thing that happens before the two get separated forcibly. It's always a painful trope to watch. Yeah, the live-action characters, like with the first movie, they don't have much to offer on their own. The middle turns into a road trip-like movie of trying to gather everybody in a montage, traveling through various Warner Brothers universes, just a way for Warner Brothers to show off branding, but more on that aspect shortly. And of course, I think a lot of us knew going in that the game was going to consist of the Toon Squad getting their asses kicked by the Goon Squad at first, only to get defeated in Spirit and have their confidence raise again, leading to a strong second half of the game, only for something to go almost wrong near the end of the game, and leading the Toon Squad to having to squeeze out a bare win over the Goon Squad. And for how much they pulled from the last third of the original Space Jam, it's kind of surprising to see that they forgot that the Monstars actually joined the Looney Tunes after they lost the match against them. Along with this plot, we get lots and lots of in-movie ads, promotions, brandings, basically a 2-hour version of
Buy more keychains! Buy more keychains!
From the drawn-out scene of LeBron falling through various Warner Brothers universes within the serververse, ending with a hole shaped as a Nike logo in Toon World, to the road trip portion of the movie with DC and Game of Thrones, to even a controller that doesn't even have a full 4 stars on Amazon. Which, to be fair, good controllers for Android phones specifically are hard to find, but still. It's pretty hard to ignore the fact that this film's #1 purpose was to show off branding one way or another, whether it's a Warner Brothers owned property, or something sports related, Nike, whatever. Not unlike the first Space Jam, of course. This movie would do anything to grab your attention, even down to having Big Chungus and Rick and Morty make quick appearances.
We're done running tests on your Badger thing. It turns out his condition is irreversible. I'll never erase what I saw from my brain. He's your problem now, dum-dum.
Space Jam: A New Legacy, I know your dirty tactics and I ain't buying it. That being said, yes, at this point, it should be obvious that Space Jam is synonym for mass promotion of sports, branding, and franchises. No mincing words there, and you don't even need a strong story to be able to fulfill that aspect. But, I mean, call me crazy, stupid, whatever, but I have to give props to this movie's writing, even though the overall story isn't strong, for at least trying to work with the material that, I mean, this movie is giving them. I mean, so much to the point that they're able to at least better connect the Warner Brothers serververse and the real world to an extent that it just doesn't make the movie feel as slow as in the first one. In the first movie, we cut back and forth to the real world way too often, where the basketball players were moping about losing their talent, not believing a thing about aliens, the news squabbling about what happened and knowing what's next, basically the side of the movie where little of the action was happening at that point. Now, this is obviously not me trivializing the ramifications of how the NBA News Society would react if such a thing were to happen in reality, but with this movie, if the main focus was intended to be about Michael Jordan helping the Looney Tunes, and later himself, not get enslaved, why were we expected to give this much of a crap about everything that was happening in the real world, where no one knew how the NBA players lost their talent in the first place? Their squabbling did nothing to move the plot closer to conclusion, unlike in Toon World, where the actual stakes and consequences again were directly felt. In the sequel though, again, the story may not be strong, but it's set up in a way that the stakes are raised for not just LeBron and the Toon Squad, but for the thousands of people who are tuned into the livestream of his match against the Goon Squad, which in my eyes kept the movie, well, moving at least. It's also worth mentioning that the first Space Jam was just under an hour and a half, while Space Jam: A New Legacy was just under 2 hours. And in the latter, because I felt the weight of the situation much more than in the first movie, I felt much less time was wasted in the latter. What also helped keep my attention through the whole movie were the visual styles. For the first time since 2006 Baham Duck, the Looney Tunes returned to their 50s Chuck Jones Friz Freeling style that dominated over the prior 50 years. And I've gotta say, considering what we've gotten from Warner Brothers in the past several years alone, and the fact that I prefer the 1940s Tex Avery, Bob Clampett branded screwballness in general over anything, I've gotta say, the 50s style of the Looney Tunes is a little hard to get back to, but that's just my personal preference at the end of the day, and one that is very much offset by the fact that 1/3 of this movie is done in hand-drawn animation! And not only is it hand-drawn, but unlike in the first movie where Michael Jordan retains his live-action form no matter what, LeBron actually turns into a cartoon character with them when he's in Toon World. And when Toon World turns into a basketball stadium where characters from other universes appear, and the people tuning into the livestream as well, LeBron turns back into live action, while the Looney Tunes characters turn into CGI, which they still look quite good in, reminiscent of those CG shorts from 10 years ago. And of course, you have the Warner Brothers serververse where most of this movie takes place in, which kind of makes you think of Ready Player One, maybe even drew too much inspiration from it. Regardless, the scale of the environment alone was one of my favorite aspects of Ready Player One, so seeing a semi-similar setup in Space Jam: A New Legacy was a treat. Sure, that means force-feeding us lots of visual cues to buy merchandise, some more subtle than others, mostly not. But it does make for some watchable world building, or rather server building here. Back onto the Looney Tunes characters themselves, I also think that they were portrayed much better here than in the first Space Jam. Nowhere near as gross or obnoxious.
What up? It's Porky Pig. They call me P-double-L-G. Step to me, he don't want no trouble. This pig is lit. I'm super legit. Every time I'm out in public, people asking me for pics.
You do realize that Robot Chicken only did that rap segment as a parody and not as an actual inspiration for the Looney Tunes franchise, right? But otherwise, I have no complaints with how the Looney Tunes were portrayed here, and in fact, they do provide for some of the movie's more funnier moments.
And I wish them all the best in their new endeavors.
I say that plain old sucks.
As I mentioned before, the Looney Tunes design and in turn their personalities take more after their tame 50s selves that were crafted by Chuck Jones and Friz Freeling. And while not my ultimate favorite takes on the characters again, for a movie that was made much more for commercial purposes than for creative ones, they are a sight for sore eyes. With the giant exception of one character. Lola Bunny. And before I go on further about her, no, I am not upset about Lola's boobs disappearing. If that worked you up enough to cause a ruckus, well, all I can say is...
There is hope. There is help. There is the
Please, please, please get a life foundation.
I was prepared for the generic story. I was prepared for the heavy commercial in this movie. I was even prepared for Daffy not being his screwball self, which he wasn't. And I was even prepared for Lola having to have her wackiness from Wabbit/New Looney Tunes and the Looney Tunes show to be toned down quite a bit. But holy crap, it's like this movie completely ignored Lola's character over the past, well, 25 years. And I'm not just referring to the TV shows I mentioned, but also the comic book tie-ins with Lola, which actually gave her a bit of a spunk that made her stand decently well on her own. This is the one item that legitimately let me down, even compared to the first Space Jam, because the writers, at least in that movie, had the excuse of introducing who was originally going to be Honey Bunny for the first time in animation and not knowing how to do it under a literal commercial director's direction. Honey Bunny, by the way, was a semi-regular character in the comics as Bugs' girlfriend, but Space Jam had to change the fur and name for various reasons, hence how we have Lola Bunny now instead. In Space Jam: A New Legacy though, especially considering how much better we've gotten in writing female characters in general over the past 25 years since the original's release, and the fact that Lola's persona both pre and post Looney Tunes show was used for comedic purposes in print or on screen at one point or another during the past 25 years as well, there is absolutely no excuse at this point to make Lola as boring as she was in this movie. Near the end of the movie, when the Toon Squad planned to perform a game-breaking move and was deciding who should risk deletion by doing it, I was screaming for Lola to do it, because what other purpose does she have within the Looney Tunes franchise if she can't be, well, Looney in any way, shape, or form? Plus, it would have been a great use for her, especially when you consider that she was willing to sacrifice completing the challenges on time earlier in the movie to save Bugs and Lebron from falling into the lava pit, and the fact that she wouldn't have actually died anyway, as seen with Bugs, who ended up doing that move in the end. And while we're still on Lola Bunny, what also makes her different from the other Looney Tunes characters, besides her lack of looniness of course, is that unlike the other Looney Tunes characters that more or less retain their usual voice talents, with Lola Bunny, this movie decided to rely on name recognition. For the power of stardom! Yeah, I'm still working on that. For Space Jam: A New Legacy, Lola here was voiced by Zendaya, who was known for playing MJ in the MCU Spider-Man movies. Now, this is not to knock on Zendaya's voice here, as it was the only remotely interesting thing about Lola in this movie, but even then, wouldn't it be great to not rely on big-budget celebrities to voice long-existing characters in big-budget movies? Even if they do a good job at it, it's going to lead the audience to expect them to voice these characters regularly going forward with the rest of the Looney Tunes cast, but, I mean, considering the budget that it takes to hire these people in the first place, I mean, what's the feasibility in that? Well, this is the complaint that goes way beyond the scope of this movie anyway. So to sum up my opinion on Space Jam: A New Legacy, the movie has a generic overall story, the live-action characters aren't very interesting, the movie is very reliant on promoting something somehow and will do shameless things to grab our attention, and of course made Lola Bunny into a blank slate. But you know what other movie had those issues? The first Space Jam. And do you know what movie didn't portray the Looney Tunes nearly as well themselves, let alone do a good job in keeping my attention when shifting between the real world and Toon World? Space Jam as well. I guess what I'm trying to say, folks, is that if I were to give the original Space Jam a 4 out of 10, I would give Space Jam: A New Legacy a 5 out of 10. Still met in the grand scheme of things, but at least in the new movie, there was more of an effort to try and work with what they can, and create an immersive environment out of it, despite creativity still taking a far backseat to the commercialism aspect of this movie, which kind of raises the question, where were all these harsh critics for Space Jam: A New Legacy when the original movie came out? And what were people expecting with the new movie? Snarkiness aside, if you're one of those people who liked the first Space Jam movie but absolutely hated the sequel, that's perfectly fine. But I would suggest rewatching the first movie again to see if your opinion will still hold up, because having rewatched the movie myself recently to prepare for the sequel, I can say that a lot of the problems that people had with Space Jam: A New Legacy was exactly applicable with the original movie as well, except Space Jam: A New Legacy had a few saving graces that made it just a bit more tolerable than the original movie. As for why the original Space Jam didn't feel nearly as promoting and was just smaller in scale, well, there were two reasons. The first being the Turner Time Warner merger not being finalized yet. In fact, Space Jam's release took place right before it was finalized, so during the production of the movie, Warner Brothers at that point didn't have rights to any of the MGM characters and franchises, like The Wizard of Oz, Tom and Jerry, Droopy, or any of the other Tex Avery characters. They didn't have rights to the Hanna-Barbera characters. Hell, they didn't even have rights to a portion of Warner Brothers' Brothers' own library, specifically the black and white film library before 1950, as well as the pre-1948, or specifically pre-August 1948, color cartoon library and the harmonizing Merry Melodies. It's so convoluted, isn't it, what Warner Brothers had and had not the rights to. The second reason being that Warner Brothers in 1996, or Hollywood in general at the time, wasn't quite in franchise frenzy yet, so nobody had nearly as many flashy IPs to show, unlike today. Having said all that, if you do watch the movie again now and still stand by that the original Space Jam was good while the new one was not, that's perfectly fine, and please enlighten me in the comments below. I am very curious to know your reasoning on this. Either way, it's Space Jam we're talking about here. It should come as no surprise or anger to anybody that these two words, no matter what context they're used in, are synonyms for corporate product. I mean, come on. The original movie was directed by a commercial guy, so it's expected that a sequel 25 years later, at a time when Hollywood banks very much on nostalgia, wouldn't be that much different in principle. All we can hope for with these types of movies is that they at least put in some effort to try and create something feasible under these said circumstances. And in my opinion, with Space Jam: A New Legacy, whether through dumb luck or genuine passion, I'll admit I have no idea, they did just enough to make this a watchable movie. Nothing great, nothing bad, just a corporate mediocre product. And with Space Jam, I mean, that's really all you can ask for. And Hollywood, what's so hard about crediting every single person involved in the animation process, especially the character designers of a movie that's been cancelled and delayed for 25 years? Hi there! We here at Toonland Inquirer like to have a lot of fun, but sometimes can get carried away with certain things. In this case, me forgetting certain details that I meant to bring up during the review. First, you may have remembered me mentioning that Chuck Jones hated the original Space Jam. Which, let's be frank here, Space Jam: A New Legacy would probably not change his mind on the franchise much. That said, one of the new movie's most notable detractors is none other than Joe Pytka himself, the original Space Jam director, slamming this movie for a variety of things, from a mediocre soundtrack to LeBron simply not being Michael Jordan, he doesn't get much more specific on that particular criticism, to an interesting take on Bugs Bunny, forgetting that a third of this movie takes place in hand-drawn. Pytka said that the new version of Bugs Bunny looked like one of those fluffy dolls you buy at an airport gift shop to bring your kid when your business trip has taken too long. Well, that's a weird comment considering that Space Jam was designed to lure kids into buying merchandise like those fluffy dolls. Basically, this boils down to, it's not my movie, I don't like it. No one's allowed to desecrate the Looney Tunes name but me. Nobody!
I wet myself.
Well, I'll give you that last one, Mr. Pytka. The other item I wanted to bring up was the lack of Pepe Le Pew in Space Jam: A New Legacy, and possibly the Looney Tunes franchise going forward. To that, I will say that for the sake of having everyone, it did suck that he wasn't included in the new movie, but I don't think Pepe Le Pew appearing would have improved much. Now, whether you like Pepe Le Pew's cartoons or not, which for the record I thought were fine early on until the shorts began ending with Pepe continuing the chase rather than get his comeuppance for his pursuance, I think many of us can agree that with everything over the past 5 years, the article accusing Pepe for normalizing rape culture was just the cherry on the top. I don't think you're gonna find anyone willing to continue with Pepe's established shtick, but that doesn't mean he has to be erased from existence. The fact that Pepe's portrayal as a spy and Wabbit/New Looney Tunes was largely ignored at the height of the ruckus that Pepe normalizing rape culture article was causing is full testament to how horribly treated the show was during its run. Seriously, Warner Brothers, you did great with Looney Tunes cartoons, but you can still learn a thing or two from its predecessor.